Welcome. In this video, we are going to be discussing the phases the moon goes through over time. Now, you might be wondering, in what way does the moon go through phases? Well, to answer that, if you think about the moon, you will realize that the moon is not always in the same shape. Now, the goal of this video is going to be to bring you a better understanding of what causes the moon to constantly change its shape, as well as look at some of the other patterns the moon follows. Our focus question for this video is going to be, what causes phases of the moon? Now, in order to direct our thinking for the video, let's look at some guiding questions as well as some claims that address these questions. Our first guiding question is, how exactly does the moon change day by day? And the claim that goes along with this is that the moon is not a stationary object, and we'll be looking more at this in the next slide. Our second guiding question is, what kind of moon patterns can be observed? There are a number of moon patterns to be observed, but one is that the same side of the moon is always facing the Earth, and not many people probably know this. Our last and third guiding question is going to be, what causes the phases of the moon, or the moon changing its shape? And the claim that goes along with this is the moon actually goes through 8 phases over the period of about a month, roughly. And this just has to do with the angle that we're viewing the moon from. It's not actually changing its shape physically. So a good way to get us started off is to address the common misconception that the moon is a stationary object. As you can see from the animation, the moon is not at all a stationary object, but actually orbits the Earth in the same way we know that the Earth orbits the Sun. It takes the moon about 29 days to complete a full orbit around the Earth, a much faster process than the Earth orbiting the Sun, which we know takes 365 days, or 1 year. Now that we know that the moon orbits the Earth in the same way the Earth orbits the Sun, let's look at some other patterns that the moon regularly follows. One unchanging pattern that we can always observe of the moon is that the same side of the moon is always facing the Earth. Now, the only way that we could be seeing the same side of the moon as it orbits around the Earth is if the moon was also rotating on an axis, just as the Earth does. This is in fact exactly what is happening. It is unobservable by us, however, because the rotation of the moon happens to be synchronized with its orbit. This means that not only does it take 29 days for the moon to orbit the Earth, but it also takes just as long to complete a full rotation. This synchronization causes us to see the exact same side of the moon at all times. From this first animation, we can see exactly what would be happening if the moon did not rotate as it orbited the Earth. As you can see from the highlighted part of the moon on the right side, that as it makes its way counterclockwise from one side of the Earth to the other, it is changing the side of the moon that is facing the Earth. This is an inaccurate representation of how the moon orbits the Earth, as well as another very common misconception. Now in this animation, we can see that the moon is actually rotating on its axis, as well as maintaining the side facing the Earth throughout the entire orbit. This should be able to give you some idea as to how slowly the moon is really rotating, because, as you know, the Earth can make a full rotation in 24 hours, while the moon takes 29 days to achieve this full rotation. For evidence to prove that the moon is in fact rotating and always facing the same side of the Earth, we merely just have to look at the moon and see that the features are always the same day to day. You will never look at the moon and see any differences in features, and this leads us to believe that the same side of the moon is in fact always facing planet Earth. Finally, we will be looking at what actually makes the moon appear to change in shape over the span of about a month. The moon goes through a cycle of about 8 stages in a month, just for classification purposes. Now the question we need to address is how the moon actually seems to appear to change in shape. What is really happening is that the moon makes its orbit around the Earth and is always halfway illuminated by the sun. The shape of the moon merely has to do with the angle we are viewing it from. Starting at the new moon stage, we can see that the sun is illuminating the moon from an angle that we cannot see. As the moon makes its way around the Earth, however, we can continue to see more and more of the moon until it reaches the full moon stage. This is the most of the moon we can see at once, and as it continues its orbit, it will slowly begin to disappear again until it cycles back to the new moon stage. Now, just as a quick recap, let's once again discuss the claims made at the beginning of the video. The first claim was that the moon is not a stationary object, and we addressed the fact that the Earth does not merely sit in one place, but orbits the Earth in a process that can take about 29 days. For the second claim, we stated that the same side of the moon is always facing the Earth. The purpose of this claim was to prove that not only is the moon orbiting the Earth, but is also slowly rotating on its axis at the same time. Lastly, we looked at the 8 phases of the moon and what actually makes the moon seem to change shape. We now know that the moon does not actually physically change shape, but in changing the angle we view it from as it rotates the Earth, we are able to better see the side that the sun is illuminating.